All right. Good afternoon. Hope everyone's doing well. Uh, Michael, it's a pleasure having you here. As a firm, we've known you for a very long time as both a customer and investor, and there's a lot of exciting history to walk through as to how you're able to build Fireblocks and get to the scale you are today. I'd like to first kind of take us back to the start, when when you and your co-founders founded the company back in 2018. There were several quote unquote industry experts that expressed pushback to the vision and approach. And fast forward to today, I think we can say they were clearly wrong. What do you think those quote unquote experts missed? What are the misconceptions pertaining to Fireblocks that you most often come across today?
Yeah, it's first of all, Josh, great to see you. Thanks for being one of our closest partners, throughout the years, and probably one of the people that had the very strong influence, right, on how we navigate the space and what we were able to build, in terms of both being a customer, giving like a really good advice when things were not going to the plan, giving positive feedback when things were going according to the plan, and clearly, like, financially backing us. So appreciate the partnership. Now, specifically to your question, when we started in 2018, or actually like when we started to contemplate the idea in 2017, we had this sort of like unique insight that really brings us to where we are today, that what is actually important is basically the crypto rails, right? And not necessarily the just like buy, hold, or more kind of the speculative investment around the assets, and how the crypto rails can really from the financial rails to something that is compatible with the internet. Now, to be honest, back in 2017, 2018, I don't think it actually landed quite well with most of the people that we talked with, because first of all, there was large portion of the population that was involved were, I would say, the Bitcoin OGs, right? And the other kind of like side of that, or the extension of that, were a lot of the VCs that were investing in tokens, in ICOs, and so on. So effectively, like, most of their activity were concentrated in buying and holding assets, and less basically moving and actually using the rails. And a lot of the feedback that we were getting is like, okay, so why do you need this sort of like, combination of high performance, high throughput wallet with some of the Fireblocks network and access that allows you to interact with the ecosystem and the market? Why can't you just basically use Zappo or Coinbase or BitGo that will actually, like, the solutions that predate Fireblocks, and just put everything in cold storage? By the way, like, most people back in the days were still using Ledger Nanos, to be fair, even on the institutional side. And that's good enough. um, but interestingly enough, when you were kind of double clicking on what exactly going on with their activity, you would ask them like, okay, so when you're need to sell, or when you need to transfer to an exchange, or when you need to buy the asset, what happens when you are interacting with your counterparties? What happens when you do like working with a deposit address? They're like, oh yeah, I'm just like getting a heart attack when I'm doing that. So we kind of knew from the get-go that we are onto something, but clearly we had to find a very small subset of early adopters that we were solving a big enough problem for them in terms of with velocity, and luckily we were able to find them.
No, that's very helpful, and I think it carries through to why Fireblocks continues to have so much demand, especially on the institutional side. Is there's a lot more to do with crypto than just hold it today, and obviously crypto itself has expanded to tokenized assets, to currency in the form of stablecoins, which we'll get to later. perhaps kind of in addition to overcoming that first set of friction from how people perceive the use and custody of crypto, what were perhaps some of the other difficult challenges that you and your team faced in those early days, perhaps as it was working with some of the initial design partners and institutions?
Yeah, so the first thing that we had to navigate at this point already twice is the bear markets, right? Um, we started Fireblocks in July 2018. I think Bitcoin at that point basically dropped from, I don't know, 16 or 18K, whatever it was at that that run in the 20 in the high days of the 2017, 2018 bubble. It basically was like at 8 or 9, right? And it was trending in the wrong direction. Basically, we had 10 design partners, right? When we started the journey, that each one of them, we basically told them like, okay, this is what we're going to build. How much would you pay for this? What are the requirements? We were working with them throughout the process. And then January 2019, the product is ready. I'm calling those 10 design partners, and six of them are out of business. Not like not interested. Maybe we'll do it in like 2 months, like the usual issues that I was familiar with from just general enterprise or cybersecurity practices in my previous life and my career. Is like, yeah, Michael, like I'm sorry to tell you, but we closed the fund or we closed the desk. We because Bitcoin was at 3,500, right? So just to give people some relative idea on what happened there. So we had to navigate that. To be fair, so like 92 crisis with Terra Luna and FTX, and I think that taking a step back, I think that navigating those bear markets, especially when you are in our position, that there is very little room to escape, right? It forces you to do two things. First of all, to have like a really long-term conviction, right? And I think like, simple explanation that you can explain both to yourself and to the team, to your team, why we're doing it and what we actually believe in, right? And why at the end of the day, it is like inevitable reality that this technology will be, one of the most important motions, right, that happening those days. So that's kind of like, one component. And the second component is really, to navigate within a very challenging environment, both from a go-to-market standpoint and product standpoint, to make sure that you have on one hand, like, sustainable business. On the other hand, you are not really marginalizing yourself into an area that, on the longer run will not be viable or big.
Yeah, 10 minus 6, so four surviving design partners, and you're now at, over 1,500 companies worldwide using Fireblocks today. So definitely a different setup, including institutions like Boni, WorldPay, Visa, BTG. It's extremely impressive. Um, the theme of kind of a lot of what we're discussing today is, how do you bring institutions into our industry, especially when it comes to kind of security and being able to access the rails in a compliant way. If you had to kind of sum it up, like how do you articulate the why in terms of these firms working with Fireblocks? Like why do they pick you? What are the competitive strengths?
Yeah, I think that fundamentally they need a partner that is able to understand what they're looking to do, what are the non-negotiable um, issues around their business and how they want to step into the space, and eventually, like, a partner that is a bit obsessed about their success and is also like committed to be working with them on the long run on their requirements from a future-proof standpoint. Now, that's I would say like a lot of words, right? That eventually boils down to a technology selection. And the first pillar over there is really around security and trust and matching that with scale and resiliency. Those are some of the things that I think Fireblocks was kind of well known for from the very beginning, because as I said, the main initial value proposition of Fireblocks was really how do you manage security with being on-chain and with being transactional, which was kind of, I think, what we were able to figure out before anyone else. And we just like continued to push on that front over the cycles and over the development. The second component is really to build, I would say, a service organization that is really catered to institutional players. I think, Josh, you can probably kind of reflect on that from a operational standpoint on the other side, but I think it's non-trivial to be or to service people in an environment that transactions are settled instantly, that margin calls are triggered like within seconds, and that the underlying infrastructure that we are working against, which is basically like the various this point like over 100 blockchains, is not the most stable, or it's not designed actually like for the get-go for institutional grade, right? Like the when you read the spec of when you basically read the Bitcoin white paper, or when you read the Ethereum white paper, or when you read the Solana white paper, none of them starts with like the enterprise or institutional grade infrastructure, right? They are not. This is actually not their primary, I would say, solution domain, right? They are very much designed for open access. They're very much designed for retail access, and we need to basically layer in the ability to service institutions with the right SLA. So I think like that's the second component, and the third one is really. I think like partnership and alignment, that they view us as someone that is able to kind of cope with uh, the various waves of adoption of what's happening in the market, right? And I think we started from like CeFi trading or CeFi movement. Um, Josh, I think you guys were kind of the guys that showed us the light of how we should basically move into DeFi, and I think the adoption of DeFi, decentralized finance within Fireblocks, has been, I think, a remarkable journey for us. I think we found ourselves being in the epicenter of stablecoins and empowering that economy across multiple different use cases. And some of those things were organic, some of those things were inorganic, like the payment use cases, and of course, like what we're doing with tokenization. So our commitment to them, that we are going to be a long-term sustainable partner that is going to be a thought leader for them and a resource for them, and being able to work with them, from a security compliance regulation standpoint, but also to bring everything they need from an innovation, has been a critical part in that.
Yeah, one thing for us as a customer is the breadth of capabilities is truly impressive, especially given the size of the customer base you're serving. When us relative to like a large financial institution, we're going to be a little further up on the sophistication spectrum, where we need to do things a little deeper and closer to the rails. And the way that Fireblocks has been able to service someone like us as well as a large FI is really impressive, because you generally find a lot of companies, either shift from one or the other, and kind of aren't able to keep up with the breadth of different services that are required. But from stablecoin payments to DeFi, tokenization, you've been able to lead the company on multiple fronts and execute, which for a long-standing customer like us is great, because we can just continue to increase our usage of Fireblocks in different ways, while not reducing our competitiveness as a firm, because we have to use something that's very clunky or slow, for example. So it's really been impressive in that regard. And yeah, I think that that makes us and others a happy customer. I'd like to take a step back. You mentioned 2022. I believe this year's conference theme is called Building Through Cycles. The insolvencies and blowups of 2022 made that a very volatile and harsh year for our space. And kind of similar to your 6 out of 10 in 2018, a lot of companies didn't recover and come out of 2022. What was that year like for Fireblocks? Obviously, you guys recovered and came out even stronger, but it'd be great to kind of walk through the resiliency that Fireblocks had and kind of what drove that resiliency in such a tough year.
Yeah. So, for us, 2023, 2020, end of 2022 and 2023 was like, walk in the park because once you have like, 6 out of 10 going bankrupt, 4 out of 10 is not that much of a issue. But still, of course, like, the stake was like much higher, right? So just maybe to ground everyone, um, we kind of entering the business like basically grows 5x in 2021. In 2022, we are on a path to more than half x projections in 2022, and those are not small numbers, for a SaaS or ARR companies, right? We already basically hovering somewhere between 110 and 120 million ARR, third year that we're shipping the product. So the stake is pretty high, right? And at that point, all the sequence of events that we are familiar with is kind of unfolding. FTX happens, and everything basically comes to, first of all, like, to a complete halt, right? But then as things continue to progress, as I mentioned, on a, I'll shift a bit, like, to kind of SaaS terminology, right? The gross retention drops to 60%, which is, in any other industry, right? If we were in the database business, if we were like in a, I don't know, marketing, automation business, whatever comparable business, that's basically mean that your company is dead, right? That's would be, or it's like full on crisis, right? Which was, to be fair, not to undermine, the situation also for us, but kind of do like a bit of a Quentin Tarantino here, right? So we'll jump to the end of that story, right? 2024, we somehow starting the year with the same revenue number, right? Like we started 2023 at 110, we finished 2023 with 110, and somehow in the middle, 40% of your customers disappeared into bankruptcy because at that point we had pretty much like everyone, Genesis and BlockFi and Voyager and Celsius and like all the. Luckily, we didn't have FTX, but like, but all the other folks that were eventually got caught up in this entire situation, they were our clients, and of course there was like this whole kind of ripple effect over there that propagated through the industry. Now, what we've really done well is that we had basically two themes, right, or two beliefs, right, that eventually that has to that from speculative or from a trading activity, we need to see a migration into real world utility. And we were asking ourselves, okay, what can be that real world utility? We already had pretty strong indications that one of them is going to be stablecoin payments because we were A, seeing it through our data, and B, we already made an investment by acquiring a company called First, which became our payment engine and all the activity that we're doing around payments. So we already knew that this is already happening. It's just like a question of time and I think like regulatory changes. And the second bet that we placed over there was a bit kind of more on the non-financial use cases of gaming and loyalty and some of those things. So the combination of a you know some of the recovery that was happening in the core markets, a lot of the companies that went into bankruptcy, I think people basically, the people that left those companies, they started new ventures. They were already familiar with Fireblocks, so they wanted to partner with us again. That helped with the recovery. And of course, our ability to push and actually secure some of the most amazing partners that we have right now, on the payment side. WorldPay came out that year, Checkout came out there that year, Visa came out that year. Some of the indirect relationship through Zero Hash into Stripe came out that year that eventually translated to Bridge. So that was actually working quite well. And on the non-financial side, also, we managed to partner with companies like Flipkart, out of India, for those who are familiar with Sony. So all those things, they basically started to emerge back in to Adidas and so on in 2023. And that what really allowed us to, I would say, continue to build towards what we believed was the inevitable future and where the demand is going to be, and B, which I think was important to from like financial KPIs and just making sure that we are not dropping the ball on our execution as a company, is actually to be able to keep the revenue at the high watermark that was I would argue somewhat exceptional. And once the market came back, we've seen the market starting to come back early 2024, mid 2024. We were in this great position that I think we were way ahead of everyone else in the domains that we thought domains.
Yeah, I think the one thing to underscore that was very impressive financially with that year is, while gross logo retention, to your point, went down, the pricing per account, or the net dollar retention on your active customers, continued to scale like year after year after year, which I think really just points to the stickiness and the mission criticality of what Fireblocks provides. And as tokenization, stablecoins, blockchain rails starts to mean more and more for the world, especially with regulation that allows for interaction with rails, then Fireblocks is now maybe doing 3, 4, 5 different things for an enterprise customer, whereas before it was one or two. And I think just the fact that you've survived a lot of these blowups kind of is a testament to both product and leadership resiliency. So that kind of gives institutions confidence for when the next one comes. Hopefully it won't be as bad as 2022. But I think
Yeah, one
2025.
comment on that, Josh. Yeah,
Yeah,
which
go
I think
ahead.
is interesting is that um, I, internally, I really try not to basically use the words, right? Because I always view stickiness as like, okay, the customer is stuck with your product, so they have nowhere to go. And I don't think it necessarily drives, I don't know, like in some cases it does, right? But I think like teaching ourselves continuously is actually figuring out how do we like above and beyond of what they have expected from us last year, right? So I always tell my clients is like my employees, and especially like product is like, don't count on the fact that it's like hard for them to re-platform, right? We need to really figure out what do they need next and how do we continue to innovate from them, and like completely remove the factor that like maybe it will be hard for them to refactor, but I just like understand how do we delight them and how do we deliver more value so they want to stay and do more with us, not because they can't live, right, but because they really want to do more with us.
Yeah, and I think you see that in the growing kind of both amount of features that they're using, as well as how much they're spending on the platform. They're not doing that out of force. It's they actually are finding real needs. And yeah, no, I agree with you. As an investor, I do like that term, but I totally think the way you're thinking about it makes the most sense. Fortunately, 2025 is a completely different setup to 2022, We have a US political administration that's very friendly to blockchain and digital assets. There's exponential organic usage of stablecoins. There's, large corporations buying Bitcoin on their balance sheets, public companies, and kind of a global macro environment that's just more suitable to what digital assets stand for. How has this environment really affected Fireblocks' strategic objectives, your vision? What opportunities are you kind of excited about? I know we'll very soon get into tokenization and stablecoins, but just kind of wanted to touch at a high level how this environment has shaped the company.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's amazing. I think it's everything that we were hoping for. There are people that occasionally ask me, like, okay, so what's next for you guys? I'm like, there's no next. It's like basically everything that we like the inception of Fireblocks was just like waiting for the day that is today, right? I think about it sometimes it's like, today is really like, day one for us, right? That all the things that we build the product and the platform for, they materialize because of the regulatory clarity, B, that because it really getting from the innovators and the early adopters into the early mainstream, the people that really need the partnership with us and the trust and the security and the compliance. And we are able to deliver on the use cases that you were referring to that are predominantly, I would say, like, some of the movement or expansion of the market into non-speculative or non-trading related use cases, such as payments, such as capital markets, such as financing, and so on, that we've been luckily to position ourselves against to be the partner to help people navigate it.
Yeah, and I think it's a great segue to, the first one, tokenization, something we spend a lot of time on at Parafide. Just if you think about from a first principles basis, if you were to reconstruct the way capital markets work with blockchain in mind, it would be immensely more efficient, more transparent, more scalable, more accessible, and all this would essentially increase the velocity of capital, which means economic value is created. Today, there's 23 billion, at least 23 billion of tokenized assets on chain, anything from treasuries to private credit to real estate. It's kind of coming on chain in different shapes and forms. And Fireblocks has a kind of role in that. And I would love for you to kind of expand on how Fireblocks is positioned to capitalize on institutional finance and capital markets infrastructure blending with blockchain. What role will Fireblocks play in either kind of asset origination and kind of transaction settlement, custody, et cetera, as these real world assets grow exponentially?
Yeah, so historically, we clearly played a role in I would call like, the secure storage and the transfer of those assets. But interestingly enough, in 2023, we took the bet and we acquired a company called BlockFi that is basically providing the technical engine for doing tokenization of honestly like everything from art to financial assets. But I would say the specialization over there was really to figure out how do we use smart contract to represent complex financial assets. And we've been working with that company before we acquired them on a few really important projects, for example, debt issuance by the Israeli Ministry of Finance and the New York Stock, sorry, and the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. We've been involved with them in the Australian CBDC project. So we already knew some of the kind of high-end, high-grade projects that we were able to do together. And then we essentially acquired them and we build what is, I believe, right now the most sophisticated and rich tokenization engine that institution can leverage. And we have a lot of, I mean, that product is getting more and more adoption by the day. It's the way that it looks like it's almost like an app store of different financial assets represented by smart contract. You can use the smart contract. You can actually, there are third parties that can upload their own smart contracts. We partner with people like that publish their smart contracts over there to represent assets, and then it basically takes you through the journey of issuing those assets on chain, controlling the different compliance functions over there, controlling the different corporate actions that you may have depending on the assets. We evolve it to be multi-chain, right? So initially it only supported EVMs. Now it supports, I believe, Solana, Ripple, Stellar, I think, as well, right? And we will continue to evolve it based on demand to have cross-chain capabilities. So I think in some regards, it's kind of like, like I always refer to the things that we do. It's basically like the Switzerland of tokenization, that you can come in and, we are not opinionated. We will basically support you in choosing the best technology that is purpose built for what the asset that you want to create. And we've been quite successful with working with the likes of Wisdom Tree and a few stablecoin consortiums like the BRL and others that have been using it, and there's a pretty big demand for the product. Moving forward, and by the way, like there are some instances, for example, like with BlackRock and Securitize around the BUIDL product, that we are underpinning the technology or the key management, right, of someone like Securitize to make sure that maybe like the largest, actually like the two largest money market funds right now that are both BUIDL and the Hashnode product are all relying on the Fireblocks key management solution, right? So effectively, like we're already a big player in that $23 billion market. But also, as you mentioned, it's still like a fraction, right? So the amount of tokenized treasuries on chain, if I remember my last calculation, it's kind of like 0.05% of the entire supply, right, of treasuries worldwide. So there is a long or a big opportunity to grow it from there. One of the things that we are working on is really how to also support the market from a primary and secondary activity standpoint, and especially in terms of helping people with finding distribution partners, finding and helping people to access secondary markets. So as you can imagine, we can naturally able to expand into how this market shapes itself. Uh, and even like, and I think that there is still it's still early days, right? Because, for example, we helped DTCC with their showcase and experiment that they were demoing a month ago, which there was a lot of excitement around. But that also poses, I think, like, a question that we don't know how to answer, right? What will be the exact market structure?
Yeah.
Would we continue to see a lot of the incumbents doing more the same, or there will be like a very significant disintermediation, and how much of that will be factually democratized? I'm like very believer in the latter, right? But I think we will need to see. Regardless, I think going back to my Switzerland analogy, we are somewhat like, less opinionated. We will support whoever wants to do it, and we will help them to achieve their vision, regardless of how they view the market structure moving forward.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you completely. It's still very early days, but in addition to just the fact that from a first principle standpoint, it makes sense, the tailwinds are great as well. I mean, you have increasingly more private assets being originated as kind of banks and other former public financial players fall a little bit more to the background of finance. And then you also have the increased democratization of accessing investors, where you have Apollo, KKR, others trying to target, individual wealth, which is trillions of dollars, and it's been pretty much an untapped market. All of that is materially kind of supercharged by tokenization, because just the administrative costs of trying to have someone invest $5,000 in a private equity fund is makes it impossible to allow. But with tokenization, you can do that, and I think a company like Fireblocks would be very, very helpful in that regard. I'd like to take us to our last topic, which, as you know, is one of my favorites, and I think it's not as well known as it should be that Fireblocks is a massive player in the stablecoin space. So 2025 is, I believe, shaping up to be the year of the stablecoin. In the last 12 months alone, you've had $33 trillion of on-chain stablecoin volume. You've had 260 million active digital wallets interacting with the stablecoin worldwide. And companies from Stripe to Visa, Robinhood, et cetera, have all been ramping up real usage of stablecoins for their business needs. Now, most relevant to our conversation is the fact that Fireblocks itself has accounted for roughly 10 to 15% of all USDT, USDC volume, which is tremendous. How is Fireblocks working with stablecoins to essentially become one of the backbone players of international payments?
So I think we were firm believers in the value of stablecoins and what it going to represent, right? From an economic standpoint, I think there were like a couple of things that led to that belief. I think that we were fairly early on involved in the now I guess abandoned Libra, the Facebook stablecoin project, right? So we've seen this promise from day one. Luckily, by the way, Josh, you guys brought us in to support one of your funds that the whole strategy was basically around stablecoin. So we were able to see how that actually works in something that really mimicked, hopefully I'm not butchering the idea too much, but like, something that looks like credit markets, right? In today's age, which just using stable coins. And that was as early as I believe 2020, right? That you guys were running that strategy. And that basically allowed us to put like a significant of acquiring first digital in 2022 and build what is now the Fireblocks payment engine. So what it is, it's a payment, or it's basically an orchestration engine for payment companies and other financial intermediaries that are working with stable coins to move them worldwide. It connects them to the various liquidity providers, on-ramps, off-ramps, and so on, underpins by security that I don't think people actually talk enough about the importance of security and cybersecurity and operational security in the context of stablecoin movement. And I'll get to that in a second. And also build all the compliance capabilities into it, right? So by far, just to give some idea, in Q1, there were $500 billion of stable coins that moved through Fireblocks in Q1, January to March. We are on track to basically do 2 trillion this year, only stable coins, without any other asset. And interesting enough, because we have a preview of who's using what and why, about like some 15 to 12 of that volume to payment companies that are orchestrating mostly cross-border or payout flows that they're using it for. And that's like a pretty, and that's actually growing 12% month over month. So our biggest pipeline and the biggest set of players that we are working with are payment companies that are moving from Swift and some of those old and traditional rails into stable coins. I think it's like pretty clear why they're doing it, because the old systems are not transparent, they're slow, they're expensive. And we want to be there, or we already de facto their infrastructure, default infrastructure for them to do so. And eventually, like, they need to make sure that they are, for all the reasons that I mentioned earlier, They need someone that is able to help them do it at scale and with the security that required to move that amount of money across that many transactions.
No, it's extremely impressive. And again, I truly think stablecoins are one of the best things we've produced as a digital asset space, just given the suitability for real world problems. I could very much envision a future where a multinational CFO is managing both their tokenized assets, their stablecoins, integrating some shape or form with DeFi rails all through Fireblocks. It's a very powerful vision. I guess to maybe end this, any kind of exciting future product releases or ambitions you can leave us with that paint a clearer picture of Fireblocks' role in this new tokenization stablecoin era.
Yeah, I think that we are working on the specific set of like standardization and instructions to around stablecoins to enhance the capabilities of the Fireblocks network to do more native operations around stablecoins, and we are going to come out with some exciting announcement with some of our partners over the next couple of months. By the way, I think that stablecoins and tokenized assets, or payments and tokenized assets, they work hand in hand exactly because of the example you gave earlier. With our discussions with various treasurers, we see that as, I think, like again, something that is inevitable, right? That once you are on chain, you are going to go and invest in tokenized assets. We're doing it internally. We receive our payments. 40% of the collections that we do are in stable coins, and we do leverage BUIDL and other forms of tokenized assets to stay on chain. And lastly, I think, again, not to preempt too much some exciting things that we are working on, there is a question of like, okay, if you are a treasurer, right? Or if you're a developer, how are you going to access that? Are you going to continue and use the UI? So I think with some of the agentic capabilities that we're seeing, we've done already some experimentation that is now going to mature into a real product that we're planning to get out in the next couple of months. Is that you won't need to necessarily go and click on things, right? You could just tell someone to do some of those treasury operations for you, and it will figure out the optimal strategy to do so, and we'll do it, and we'll put the instructions again with the secure guardrails, because clearly you don't want some, hallucination when someone is moving millions of your balance sheet, on rails that cannot be recourse.
No, but I mean it's such an exciting vision, because just the addressable market of economic activity is extremely large now, given what stablecoins and tokenization can do. And again, that will be running through Fireblocks. So it's been a true privilege to see you scale the business so successfully throughout these years. And as a customer, we've been fortunate to have had a good experience as well. So yeah, thank you so much for the time and for sharing more on your vision on the trials and tribulations that you've kind of gone through to get here. And I am excited to see what the stablecoin announcements are, as I'm sure many of the listeners are too. But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time.
Yes, thanks for doing this. It was fun.